At 5:33 a.m., I sat watching the destruction of 8 years of my life on my computer screen. My supposedly paralyzed mother-in-law was comfortably stretching her arms above her head, even performing a full yoga routine. Then the thing that started it all happened. 8 years of my life had been built on diabolical lies, and I loved her so much. But these lies had to come at a price. No one could even imagine what I did to her. Don't think I didn't do what was necessary, because none of you could even guess what I did to her. In the 3rd year of our marriage, we looked perfect from the outside. I had a successful career in marketing. We had a beautiful home, and David's mother, Margaret, lived in her own house just 20 minutes away. Margaret was an elegant woman who volunteered at the hospital, organized charity events, and genuinely cared about my career success. She would ask about my campaigns, remember client names, and even suggest networking opportunities. Margaret had a way of making you feel special and chosen. Even though I wasn't her only daughter-in-law, she called me her favorite daughter-in-law. She would say things like, "David is so lucky to have found someone as smart as you," or, "I've never seen him this happy." Looking back, I realize every compliment was calculated. Every act of kindness had a purpose. Then the accident happened. That changed everything. Margaret called us from the hospital, her voice trembling, as she explained she'd lost control of her car on a rainy evening. The doctors said her spine was damaged. She was completely paralyzed from the waist down. Her independence, her volunteer work, her active lifestyle, everything was gone in an instant. David was devastated. His father had died 5 years earlier, and Margaret was the only family he had left. The night we brought her home from the hospital, she sat on the edge of our bed, her head in her hands. "I can't put her in a nursing home," she said. "He raised me alone after my father died. I owe everything to him." I understood her. I really did. When she suggested staying with us temporarily, I agreed immediately. When she said she needed full-time care, I nodded. When she looked at me with those pleading eyes and asked if I could take time off work, I said yes without hesitation. When Margaret's condition worsened, the leave became permanent. She needed help with everything: bathing, dressing, eating, taking her medication. David worked long hours at his accounting firm, so the responsibility fell to me. 6 months after the accident, I officially left my job and told my boss it was temporary, that we would find another solution soon. My friends tried to stay in touch with me at first. They would invite me to lunch, but I had to cancel because Margaret needed me. They would suggest evening activities, but Margaret's nighttime routine constantly required attention. Slowly, the invitations stopped. When I did manage to see my friends, they said I looked tired and stressed. They didn't understand our situation. They couldn't grasp the burden of caring for someone so dependent. Financial difficulties started immediately. Margaret's insurance covered some medical expenses, but not all. We installed ramps, bought a hospital bed, hired contractors to make the bathroom accessible. David took on extra clients to cover the costs. I watched our savings account dwindle each month. But what other choice did we have? Margaret's medical bills were endless. Physical therapy equipment, special pillows, medications that insurance didn't fully cover. Every month brought new expenses, new needs for her care. David would come home exhausted from work, look at the pile of bills on the kitchen counter, and just shake his head. We stopped talking about vacations, renovating the kitchen, any future that didn't revolve around Margaret's needs. The isolation began slowly. Friends stopped calling because I canceled plans so often. While my former colleagues pursued their careers, I spent my days managing someone else's life. David and I hardly talked about anything other than Margaret's schedule, appointments, and needs. Our conversations became purely functional. Margaret, meanwhile, seemed to accept her new reality with extraordinary grace. She constantly apologized for being a burden, tearfully thanking me for my sacrifices. She would say things like, "I don't know what we would do without you," or "You're an angel sent from heaven." When I felt irritable or overwhelmed, Guilt would consume me. The first strange incident occurred about 2 years after Margaret moved in. While I was preparing her lunch in the kitchen, I heard a sound like furniture being moved upstairs. Heavy dragging sounds, as if someone were rearranging the dresser. When I went to check on Margaret, she was sitting in her wheelchair by the living room window, reading a magazine, exactly where I had left her. "Did you hear that noise from upstairs?" I asked. She looked at me with a puzzled expression, tilting her head slightly. "What noise, dear? I didn't hear anything." I convinced myself it was just the house settling, or something falling in the closet. Old houses make strange noises, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the incident because the sounds were very distinct and deliberate. Then food started disappearing. I would go grocery shopping on Monday, carefully organize everything, but by Thursday, items would be gone. Not just any items, but specific things you had to walk to reach. A box of crackers from the top shelf in the pantry, fruit from the bowl on the kitchen island, a jar of olives from the back of the fridge. When I mentioned this to David, he shrugged and said he grabbed snacks while working late at night. But I knew his eating habits. David was a creature of habit. Coffee and toast for breakfast, whatever I made for lunch, and dinner together. He wasn't the type to sneak crackers and olives in the middle of the night. The locked door incident shook me more than I wanted to admit. I had gone upstairs to give Margaret her afternoon medication, which I did every day at exactly 2:00 p.m. The bedroom door was closed, which was unusual. But when I tried to turn the doorknob, the door wouldn't open. It was locked from the inside. I knocked softly. "Margaret, it's time for your medication." Silence. Then, I heard footsteps, as if someone was moving quickly. A few minutes later, Margaret called out, "Just a minute, dear. I'm struggling with my sweater." When she finally opened the door, she had returned to her wheelchair and was a little out of breath. "Sorry," she said with a smile. The door must have jammed, but I knew what a locked door felt like. I had tried it twice. That door had been deliberately locked from the inside, meaning Margaret had gotten up from her wheelchair, walked to the door, and locked it herself. When I told David this that evening, his reaction was immediate and defensive. "You're imagining things," he said, without even looking up from his laptop. "My mother can barely get from her bed to her wheelchair. She can't walk to the door and lock it." His voice was sharp, almost angry. This wasn't the David I married, the man who listened to my concerns with patience and understanding. This David dismissed my observations before I even finished explaining them. I began to pay closer attention to the dynamics between David and Margaret. They would have whispered conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room. They would exchange meaningful glances I couldn't decipher. When Margaret needed something, instead of asking me directly, she would tell David to talk to Sarah. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, as if conversations and decisions were being made around me that I wasn't privy to. The woman I cared for and the man I married seemed to be sharing secrets that I wasn't allowed to know. The discovery that changed everything happened one Tuesday morning while cleaning Margaret's bathroom. While organizing the medicine cabinet, my hand knocked over a small bottle hidden behind prescription medicine boxes. The label immediately caught my attention. Professional-grade joint lubricant for high-impact athletic performance. I stopped there, picked up the bottle, and read the small print. This wasn't a general pain relief cream or arthritis medication. It was a specialized lubricant used by serious athletes, people who subjected their joints to intense and repetitive stress. The kind of product marathon runners and gymnasts relied on. Why would a paralyzed woman need athletic-grade joint lubricant? That evening, I found David in his home office, working late, as usual. Without saying a word, I placed the bottle on his desk and waited for his explanation. He glanced at the bottle, and for a moment, I saw something flash across his face. Panic? Recognition? Then his expression turned to ordinary indifference. "Oh, that," he said, picking up the bottle and examining it as if for the first time. The physical therapist recommended it. He said it might help prevent joint stiffness, even though my mom can't feel her legs. Preventive care, you know. His explanation sounded rehearsed, very smooth. I had been to Margaret's physical therapy appointments dozens of times. Her therapist had never mentioned anything about preventing stiffness in paralyzed limbs. In fact, he had explained that Margaret's condition meant her lower body wouldn't experience joint stress requiring lubrication. Which therapist suggested this? I asked. David tapped his fingers on the table. The new one. You haven't met him yet. Margaret has a new therapist. When did he start? Last month. Mom wanted to try someone different. Thought a fresh perspective might help. But I managed Margaret's entire schedule. I took her to every appointment, sat in every waiting room, spoke to every healthcare professional. There was no new therapist. David was lying to my face, and we both knew it. That night, while David slept beside me, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 8 years, I allowed myself to consider the unthinkable. What if Margaret wasn't really paralyzed? What if this whole situation was an elaborate deception? This thought plunged me into a quagmire. Not because it was impossible, but because it began to make sense. The missing food, the locked door, the strange noises, David's defensive responses to my questions, the expensive medical bills that yielded no improvement, the way Margaret and David shared secrets they didn't want me to know. That night, I made a decision. Like the marketing expert I used to be, I would investigate properly and methodically. I would gather evidence and uncover the truth, whatever it was. In that moment, I transformed from a confused bride into a determined investigator. I would no longer accept illogical explanations. The next morning, I went to the electronics store with a story prepared. If anyone asked, I was researching home security options after some burglaries in our neighborhood. The salesperson was helpful, explaining different camera options, remote monitoring apps, and the importance of placement for optimal coverage. I bought a complete system, 4 small cameras with night vision, motion detection, and wireless connectivity. It was a system that could record continuously and send alerts to my phone. On my way home, I felt a strange mix of determination and fear. Either I was about to prove that I really was living with a paralyzed woman and had become paranoid, or I was about to uncover a deception so complex that it would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. The internal rationale was simple. If Margaret was truly paralyzed, the cameras would show it exactly, and my doubts would be dispelled. If she wasn't paralyzed, I needed evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. There was no middle ground now, because what I was about to do to her would shock everyone. It took 3 days to set up the cameras. I had to plan the timing strategically, installing them while Margaret was asleep and David was at work. One camera was placed in the living room, positioned to capture the area around Margaret's favorite chair and the path to the kitchen. Another was placed in the hallway outside the bedroom, angled to show the door and the path to the main staircase. The third camera was the most important. I hid it in the corner of the family room, where Margaret spent most of her day, behind decorative books on a high shelf. This camera had a perfect view of her wheelchair, the sofa where she sat to watch TV, and the entire open plan of the main floor. The fourth camera was placed in the basement, focusing on the area near the ground floor bedroom suite David had converted for Margaret after the accident. If she moved at night, this camera would capture any movement near her private space. The first week of surveillance was torture. Every morning I checked the footage, hoping and fearing what I might find. As the days passed, the cameras showed exactly what I expected. Margaret in her wheelchair, carefully maneuvering between her chair and the sofa, needing help for anything she couldn't reach. I watched her struggle to reach a book that had fallen next to her chair. Instead of trying to get it herself, I saw her patiently waiting for me to bring her lunch. In the evenings, I observed her struggling with obvious difficulty and careful movements to transfer from her wheelchair to her bed. By the end of the first week, I was starting to feel foolish. The cameras were showing me what I had seen for 8 years. A paralyzed woman, adapting to her limitations, living dependent on others for her basic needs. Maybe I was becoming paranoid. Maybe the stress of so many years of caregiving was causing me to see conspiracies that weren't there. Could 8 years of caregiving stress have impaired my ability to think clearly? Was I fabricating problems to find someone to blame for my unhappiness? I began re-examining every suspicious incident from the past. Maybe the locked door really had jammed. Maybe David's defensive reaction stemmed from his frustration with my questions during an already stressful time. Maybe the missing food was exactly as David said, his late-night snacking habits that I somehow failed to notice. The cameras had been recording for 10 days, and I decided to stop watching. Sitting in my car outside the market, watching the camera app on my phone, I found the whole investigation ridiculous. That afternoon, I would remove the cameras and try to repair the damage my suspicions had done to my relationship with Margaret and David. But something made me decide to check one last time. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was my old marketing career's investigative instincts, always wanting complete data before making a decision. I opened the app and rewound the footage from the previous night, expecting to see the same routine I'd been observing for over a week. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. The light in Margaret's bedroom was off, and there was no movement on the hallway camera. David and I had gone to bed around 10:30 p.m., and the house was quiet. I quickly skipped through hours of empty hallways and dark rooms. Then I saw it. At 5:23, there was movement in the living room. I rewound and watched more closely. A silhouette was moving across the frame, but the early morning lighting made it hard to see clearly. I adjusted the brightness settings and watched again. At 5:23 a.m., someone was walking around on the main floor of our house. It wasn't David, because I could see in the hallway camera's view that our bedroom door was closed. It wasn't me either, because I was sleeping next to my husband until my alarm went off at 6:30. They moved purposefully and comfortably. No wheelchair was visible in the frame. I watched this person walk normally and quickly from the family room to the kitchen. Their movements were fluid and confident, nothing like the careful movements and limited mobility I had witnessed for 8 years. My hands were shaking as I recorded the footage and prepared to watch what would happen next. After 10 days of nothing happening, the cameras had finally captured something that would either confirm my worst fears or bring up questions I wasn't ready to answer. I woke up at 5:15 the next morning, unable to sleep after what I saw in that short clip. Taking care not to wake David, I quietly went downstairs to my laptop and opened the camera app with trembling fingers. I needed to watch the entire sequence to understand what had actually happened in the early hours of the morning. The timestamp showed the movement began at 5:30. I watched Margaret's bedroom door open and her step out into the hallway. She walked out normally, not rolling or being carried with difficulty, stretching her arms above her head as if she had just woken up from a restful sleep. With perfect balance and coordination, she made her way to the living room. I watched her bend down to touch her toes, rotate her shoulders, and stretch her neck from side to side. These were not the careful, assisted movements of someone with limited mobility. This was a woman preparing for exercise. What happened next erased everything I thought I knew about the past 8 years. Margaret walked to a corner of the living room where I kept some decorative storage boxes. She opened one and pulled out yoga mats, light weights, and resistance bands. Equipment I had never seen before, hidden in my own home, right before my eyes. She arranged everything methodically, as if following a familiar routine. The exercise that followed was comprehensive and intense. Margaret started with yoga poses that required perfect balance and core strength. Downward facing dog, warrior poses, tree poses. Positions that required her to fully engage her legs and coordinate her entire body. Her form was perfect, her movements fluid and controlled. After a 20-minute yoga session, she moved on to weights. She squatted while holding 5-pound dumbbells. She did lunges that spanned the entire living room. He performed calf raises, lifting himself up and down with perfect control. He did jumping jacks, his feet leaving the ground with each jump, his legs moving completely in sync. I sat there watching this 30-minute exercise routine, my mouth agape in shock. This was not a woman paralyzed from the waist down. This was not someone who needed help getting from her wheelchair to her bed. This was a woman in excellent physical condition, maintaining her form with a disciplined exercise routine. But the worst was yet to come. After finishing her workout and putting away all the equipment, Margaret walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. She stood there and drank the water, looking completely normal, completely healthy. Then the phone rang. I turned up the volume on my laptop and listened to her answer. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and strong. There was no trace of the weak tone she used throughout the day. "Yes, I just finished my workout. My usual routine." There was a pause while the other person spoke. Then Margaret laughed. She really laughed. "He still doesn't realize anything," she said. "He's been providing free service for 8 years, but he still brings me breakfast in bed every morning, like a loyal servant." Another pause. "David manages him perfectly. Whenever he asks too many questions, he shuts him up. He's so desperate to be a good husband that he never argues. It's almost too easy." 1. The conversation went on for a few more minutes. Margaret recounted his performance with easy amusement, how he perfected his helpless role, how he trained me to anticipate his every need, how he and David planned this arrangement from the beginning. "The best part," she said, walking toward the bedroom, "is that he gave up everything willingly. His career, his friends, his independence. We never had to force him into anything. We just made him believe it was his moral obligation." She stopped at the bedroom door, the phone still pressed to her ear. I should probably get back to my character. Soon he would wake up and start a new day of serving me. Margaret entered the bedroom, and within minutes the house was quiet again. When my alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., he would be back in his wheelchair, back in the role of a helpless patient, dependent on my care and devotion. Sitting there, staring at the blank laptop screen where the video had ended, I tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. 8 years of my life had been built on such a detailed, carefully crafted lie that I had never even questioned it. I was sitting on the floor of my bedroom, still in my pajamas, balancing my laptop on my knees, unable to move. The video had ended, but I kept staring at the black screen as if it would offer me an explanation, show me a way to make sense of what I had just seen. I felt as if my body had been severed from my mind. I could hear my heart pounding, feel my hands shaking, but it was as if I were watching someone else's physical reaction to someone else's devastating news. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be my reality. 8 years. For 8 years, I woke up at 6 a.m. and prepared Margaret's breakfast tray. For 8 years, I helped her transfer from bed to wheelchair, from wheelchair to shower chair, from shower chair to bed. For 8 years, I organized her medications, scheduled her appointments, took her to physical therapy sessions, where she performed with the same dedication she showed in her morning exercises for the doctors and therapists. I began to replay those 8 years in my mind, looking at them through the lens of what I now know. The moments when Margaret seemed to forget which leg was more affected by the stroke. The way she gripped the arms of her wheelchair when angry, her knuckles turning white with tension, showed she possessed far more physical ability than she claimed. The fact that David must have known this all along hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't something Margaret had kept from the two of us. It was something they had planned together, implemented together, and maintained together for 8 years. Every conversation in which David dismissed my concerns suddenly made sense. Every moment he deflected my questions or made me feel guilty for doubting his mother's condition. Every financial decision we made to meet Margaret's needs. every sacrifice she encouraged and praised. David had watched me give up my career to care for his perfectly healthy mother. He had watched me lose my friends, my independence, myself, all in the service of a lie, and he had encouraged me every step of the way. The calculated nature of their schemes was breathtaking. This wasn't a momentary deception or a lie that got out of hand. It was a carefully planned, methodically executed conspiracy that required coordination, commitment, and absolute devotion to maintain the illusion. They had turned me into one of their unpaid servants, one of the caregivers living in their homes, one of the personal assistants working 24 hours a day without question or compensation. They had stolen 8 years of my life, and they had done it with my consent. But why? What would be the outcome? What had they gained from this elaborate deception that was worth ruining my life and my marriage? I thought about our financial situation, how much money we had spent over the years on Margaret's care. Medical equipment, home modifications, special treatments. But then I realized that Margaret's insurance covered most of the major expenses. The real cost wasn't financial. It was my freedom, my career, my identity. Maybe that was the goal. Maybe they wanted to keep me isolated, dependent, unable to leave even if I wanted to. Maybe they wanted to ensure I never had the independence or resources to challenge their control. Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe Margaret just enjoyed being served, having someone at her beck and call, the power that came from being the center of everyone's attention and concern. Maybe David enjoyed his wife focusing entirely on the family's needs, rather than her own ambitions and goals. The transition from shock to anger happened gradually, like cold water slowly coming to a boil. First came numbness, disbelief, a desperate hope that I might have misinterpreted what I saw. Then came the pain, a deep sense of betrayal that felt like a physical wound. But as I sat on the bedroom floor, replaying 8 years of lies and manipulation over and over, the pain began to transform into something colder, harder, more focused. It wasn't just about the time they stole from me. It wasn't just about the career opportunities I missed or the friendships I lost. It was about two people who looked at me and saw someone they could use, manipulate, someone whose life mattered less than their own comfort and convenience. They made me an accomplice to my own destruction, and they relished every minute of it. I thought about Margaret's laughter during that phone call, the easy amusement in her voice as she referred to me as her loyal little servant. I thought about David's dismissive reactions when I asked questions, how he made me feel guilty for having doubts about his mother's condition. They hadn't just lied to me. They had taught me to lie to myself, to reject my own observations, to accept their version of reality, even when it contradicted everything I saw with my own eyes. The anger that enveloped me was neither hot nor explosive. It was cold, calculated, and methodical. They had carefully planned this deception, executed it flawlessly, and sustained it for 8 years. If I was going to retaliate, I had to be as committed to my goals as they were to theirs, equally careful and methodical. I would not confront them emotionally. I would not give them the opportunity to manipulate me or convince me that I had misunderstood what I saw. I would not allow them to prepare their defense or find ways to cover their tracks. I would gather evidence. I would document everything. I would build such a comprehensive, undeniable case that they would have no choice but to face the consequences of their actions. The first thing I did was make multiple copies of that damning video footage. I saved it to 3 different cloud storage accounts, burned it to DVDs, and transferred it to 2 separate external hard drives. This evidence was too important to risk losing due to computer crashes or accidental deletion. However, no matter how incriminating it was, a single video wouldn't be enough. I needed to build a comprehensive case showing the full scope and duration of their deception. I needed documentation that would stand up to scrutiny and couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding or an isolated incident. I started with a timeline going back to the beginning of Margaret's so-called accident. I wrote down every suspicious event I could remember. Unexplained noises, missing food, locked doors, David's defensive responses to my questions. Events that seemed insignificant at the time now formed a pattern of deception spanning 8 years. The financial records were crucial. I gathered every receipt related to Margaret's care, every insurance claim, every medical bill. I calculated the total cost of the equipment we purchased, the changes we made to our home, the private treatments and therapies we paid for. The figures were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars had been spent to accommodate a non-existent disability. But the real cost couldn't be measured in dollars. I documented every career opportunity I missed during those 8 years. The promotion I turned down because I couldn't travel for work. The consulting contracts I declined because I couldn't meet the work hours. The professional conferences I missed because Margaret needed constant care. I researched salary data in my field, calculating how much I would have earned had I continued advancing in my career, instead of becoming a full-time caregiver. The income I lost over those 8 years was devastating. Not just the immediate paychecks, but the missed promotions, the lost networking opportunities, and the cumulative impact of the gaps in my professional experience. Then came the more personal records. While caring for Margaret, I wrote down every friendship that ended because I couldn't maintain my social relationships. I listed every family event I missed, every vacation we canceled, every aspect of my life I sacrificed to meet her supposed needs. I started carrying a small digital recording device, the kind used for business meetings and interviews. Every conversation David and I had about Margaret's situation, every discussion we had about her care needs, every moment she reinforced her lie, I recorded it all. I was building an audio record of her active participation in perpetuating this deception. The conversations were revealing in unexpected ways. When I listened to David's answers to my questions, I could hear his careful phrasing, his way of deflecting the topic rather than answering directly. The subtle manipulation techniques he used to make me doubt my own observations. I also recorded Margaret during our daily interactions. Her voice during the day was very different from the strong, clear tone I had heard on the phone that morning. Even in private moments when she thought no one was watching, she maintained her weak, independent personality with extraordinary consistency, never deviating from her character. But now the cameras were always watching. I had expanded the surveillance system, adding cameras to areas I had initially overlooked. I captured his entire daily routine, documenting the contrast between his helplessness in public and his abilities in private life. The evidence folder on my laptop grew thicker every day. Screenshots of his intense exercise routines. Audio files of David reinforcing his supposed limitations. Financial records showing the cost of his fake care. Timeline documents proving the duration and scope of his conspiracies. I also began documenting the impact on my own health and well-being. The stress of 8 years of caregiving had taken a physical toll I hadn't noticed at the time. I made doctor's appointments, had blood tests done, documented the anxiety and depression that developed during years of isolation and service. The psychological evaluation was particularly illuminating. The therapist I consulted identified the classic symptoms of emotional abuse: self-doubt, isolation from support systems, and the gradual erosion of personal identity and autonomy. She explained that abusers often use feelings of guilt and obligation to control their victims, thereby making them complicit in their manipulation. I wasn't just gathering evidence of fraud. I was documenting a systematic campaign of emotional and financial abuse designed to destroy my independence, my career, and my self-confidence over 8 years. Every piece of evidence I gathered pointed to the same conclusion. This was not a misunderstanding or a situation that had gotten out of hand. This was a deliberate and calculated conspiracy to exploit my labor, compassion, and sense of duty for their own gain. The pile of evidence grew daily, but I wasn't ready to use it yet. I needed to be strategic about timing, playing my cards right, and ensuring that when I finally revealed what I knew, the consequences would be swift and lasting. The urge to go downstairs and throw the evidence in their faces was very strong. Every morning when I brought Margaret her breakfast tray, watching her helplessness, I wanted to shout the truth at both of them. Every evening, when David asked about his mother's condition, pretending to be concerned for her well-being, I wanted to play the exercise video on his laptop. But I forced myself to think strategically. An emotional confrontation would give them time to prepare their defenses, coordinate their stories, minimize or explain away what I had discovered. They had had 8 years to perfect their deception. They wouldn't be caught off guard easily. More importantly, I realized that exposing their lies wouldn't be enough. I didn't just want them to confess to what they had done. I wanted results. I wanted justice. Just as I had to face the consequences of my choices, I wanted them to face all the consequences of theirs. The strategic advantage of allowing them to continue unaware was enormous. Every day they perpetuated the deception, they sank deeper into legal and financial trouble. Every conversation David had that reinforced Margaret's supposed disability was another piece of evidence for my case. Every dollar we spent on his fake care was another charge against them. I started researching divorce lawyers, looking for one who specialized in fraud and financial abuse cases. The consultations opened my eyes. The attorneys I spoke with were shocked by the scope and duration of the deception, but also excited by the strength of my evidence. One attorney explained that David and Margaret's actions constituted multiple types of legal violations. Insurance fraud alone could lead to criminal prosecution. Financial exploitation, intentional isolation, conspiracy to commit fraud. Each element opened different legal avenues to seek justice. However, the lawyer also emphasized the importance of timing. If I filed for divorce immediately, David would have the opportunity to hide his assets, collaborate with Margaret on damage control, and prepare his legal defense. If I waited until I secured my own financial independence, the balance of power would be entirely different. The plan that emerged from these consultations was methodical and comprehensive. First, I would secure my own financial position by quietly separating our assets and protecting my interests. Then, I would gather additional evidence while they were unaware of my knowledge. Finally, I would implement a coordinated legal strategy that would maximize the consequences of their actions. The importance of perfect timing cannot be overstated. I needed to move fast enough that they couldn't prepare their defense, but slow enough that I wouldn't make mistakes that would jeopardize my position. When I finally revealed what I knew, I had to be absolutely certain the outcome would be definitive and permanent. I began taking detailed notes on their daily routines, schedules, and habits. I needed to know when they were most vulnerable, when they were least prepared for conflict, when I could achieve the greatest impact with the least opportunity. The plan also required me to maintain my normal behavior while secretly preparing for battle. I had to continue bringing Margaret her breakfast tray, helping with her fake physical needs, listening to David's fake concerns about his mother's condition. This role was exhausting, but necessary. Every smile I forced, every act of kindness I performed, every moment I pretended to believe his lies. All were pieces preparing for the moment when the truth would finally emerge and the consequences would finally begin. Opening a separate bank account felt like the first real step I took toward regaining my independence. I chose a bank on the other side of town, somewhere David would never go, and opened a checking account and a savings account in my name only. The bank clerk who helped me was professional and discreet, asking no questions about why I needed financial privacy from my husband. Careful planning was needed to transfer money without arousing suspicion. I couldn't transfer large sums at once because that would show up on our joint account statement and tip David off that something had changed. Instead, I developed a system of small, regular transfers that looked like routine expenses. I started by withdrawing cash during my regular grocery shopping. Instead of spending $200 on groceries, I would withdraw $300 and pocket the extra 100. Within a few weeks, these small amounts accumulated into a significant emergency fund in my private account. Joint accounts were more complicated. David and I had been married for 11 years, and most of our assets were intertwined in a way that would require legal intervention to properly separate. However, without revealing my intentions to him, I could begin protecting what was rightfully mine. I methodically documented all the assets we owned together: the house, 2 cars, our retirement accounts, the savings we had accumulated before Margaret's so-called accident. I obtained copies of all financial statements, tax returns, insurance policies, and investment records. If David tried to hide assets during the divorce proceedings, I would have a complete set of documents to prove what we owned together. Removing my name from joint accounts required more creativity. I couldn't remove myself from the accounts without David's signature, but I could stop depositing money into them and redirect my income elsewhere. Since I no longer had a traditional job income, this meant taking control of the household expenses David gave me each month. Instead of depositing his contribution to household expenses into our joint checking account, I started depositing it into my personal account and paying the bills from there. This allowed me to control the household budget while establishing my independent financial resources. The discovery of secret accounts opened in David's name was the most shocking part of this financial investigation. While gathering documents of our joint assets, I found references to accounts I had no knowledge of: a savings account at another bank, an investment portfolio that had been growing for years, a retirement fund that was not part of our joint financial planning. David was secretly accumulating wealth while encouraging me to sacrifice my career and financial independence to care for his mother. He was systematically dismantling my financial security while building his own. Realizing this was financial abuse and emotional manipulation added another dimension to my case. David hadn't just participated in his mother's deception. He had used that deception to financially control and exploit me. Every dollar I couldn't earn while caring for Margaret was a dollar that increased his relative financial power in our marriage. I began to calculate the true cost of their conspiracy. Not just the money we spent on Margaret's fake care, but also the income I lost, the career advancement I missed out on, and the retirement savings I couldn't accumulate while providing 8 years of unpaid caregiving. The numbers were staggering. If I had continued working and advanced in my marketing career instead of being Margaret's caregiver, I would have earned hundreds of thousands of dollars more than I did. The combined effect of lost wages, missed promotions, and interrupted retirement contributions meant that their fraud cost me more than half of my lifetime earnings. But I was preparing my case with my lawyer using this financial evidence. Every secret account David hid was proof of his fraudulent financial practices. Every dollar I lost due to caregiving was proof of the economic impact of their conspiracy. Every expense we incurred for Margaret's fake disability was documentation of the fraud. The lawyer explained that financial fraud in divorce cases could be grounds for an unequal division of marital assets. If I could prove that David intentionally hid money and encouraged me to sacrifice my earning potential, the court could award me a larger share of our joint assets to compensate for his fraudulent behavior. More importantly, the financial evidence strengthened the case for initiating criminal prosecution against both David and Margaret. Insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, reverse financial elder abuse. The list of potential charges grew as we documented the full scope of their deception. I was no longer just planning a divorce. I was planning a full financial reckoning, holding them accountable for every dollar they stole from my future and every lie they told to justify that theft. When I walked into my lawyer's office that morning with a bag full of evidence, I felt like I was taking control of my life for the first time in 8 years. My lawyer, a smart woman in her 50s who specialized in complex divorce cases, had seen many marital deceptions. but she had never seen anything like what I was about to show her. I started with the video footage. Sitting in the conference room, we watched Margaret's morning exercise routine on the lawyer's laptop screen. The lawyer's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine shock as she watched a supposedly paralyzed woman perform perfect jumps and yoga poses. When the video ended, he said, "This is extraordinary. I've dealt with cases involving hidden assets, secret relationships, even fake health conditions for insurance purposes. But I've never seen anything this detailed and long-term." I showed him the timeline I had created, documenting 8 years of suspicious events that now made perfect sense. Financial records proving the cost of Margaret's fake care. Audio recordings reinforcing David's supposed disability. Medical documents I had collected showing my own health issues caused by years of stress and isolation. Her shock at the scale and duration of the deception confirmed that I was right. I had lived with this situation for so long that I had begun to question whether it was really as bad as it seemed. Having a legal expert confirm that this was indeed an extraordinary situation helped me trust my own judgment about the seriousness of what had been done to me. The legal grounds for divorce were clear and compelling. Fraud was the primary ground. David's mother's active participation in perpetuating the deception constituted fraud against me as his spouse. Emotional abuse was documented by my medical records and my testimony about systematic isolation and manipulation. However, the lawyer was most excited about the strategy of using the evidence to obtain maximum compensation. Because David was an accomplice in defrauding me of 8 years of earning potential and hid his assets while encouraging my financial dependence, the lawyer believed we could obtain compensation far exceeding half of our current marital assets. "We're not just dividing what you have right now," he explained. "We're calculating what you could have had if they hadn't stolen your 8-year career. We're factoring in emotional distress, lost opportunities, and intentional financial exploitation. This isn't a typical divorce settlement. It's compensation for systematic fraud." The strategy to protect me from any counterclaims or demands was equally important. David could claim I violated his privacy by recording conversations or installing security cameras. Margaret could claim her privacy was violated, or that I forced her to continue being deceived in some way. However, the lawyer was confident that the evidence of their fraud would overshadow any privacy concerns. When someone commits a crime, the expectation of privacy is significantly diminished. The recordings and security camera footage were evidence of ongoing fraud, making them legally admissible and defensible. Margaret's plan to expose her medical fraud to the authorities opened up additional legal avenues. Insurance fraud was a serious crime that could lead to criminal prosecution, fines, and even imprisonment. The lawyer had connections in the district attorney's office, which specialized in healthcare fraud cases. "This isn't just about your divorce," he explained. "What they did is a crime. The insurance companies they defrauded, the medical experts they lied to, the government programs they may have exploited. Many agencies will be very interested in this evidence." The resulting comprehensive legal strategy attacked their deception on multiple fronts simultaneously. The divorce case would secure my financial future and hold David accountable for his role in a conspiracy. The criminal case would ensure that both David and Margaret faced the legal consequences of their fraud. The insurance investigations would recover the money stolen through false claims. But timing was crucial. If we moved too quickly, they might have time to coordinate their defenses or minimize the evidence. If we waited too long, they could discover my investigation and take steps to cover their tracks. The lawyer suggested a coordinated approach where all legal proceedings would be initiated simultaneously. The divorce papers, criminal complaints, and insurance fraud reports would be filed on the same day, leaving David and Margaret no opportunity to strategically prepare or respond. "We want them to wake up one morning and realize their entire world has changed," he said. "No warning, no chance to twist the story, no opportunity to coordinate their lies. Just the sudden, inevitable reality of their 8-year conspiracy being exposed and its consequences beginning to unfold. E. The legal strategy wasn't just about punishment, although that was definitely part of it. This strategy aimed to ensure that I would never again be subjected to their manipulation, and that other potential victims would be protected from similar conspiracies. Most importantly, it was about regaining my power after being systematically deprived of my autonomy, independence, and right to determine my own destiny for 8 years. For the first time since Margaret's so-called accident, I was the one making strategic decisions, controlling the timing, and determining the outcome. The balance of power was finally shifting in my favor, and I intended to use this advantage to seek justice for what they had stolen from my life. The morning I chose to deliver the divorce papers was a Thursday in early October. I had planned everything meticulously. David would return home from work at 6:00 p.m. Margaret would be in the living room as usual in the evening, and both would attend what I had decided would be our last family dinner. I spent the day carrying on with my normal routine, with an almost surreal calm. At 8:00 a.m., I brought Margaret her breakfast tray, helped her take her morning medication, and listened to her complaints about the physical therapy appointment we had scheduled for the following week. She didn't know it yet, but she would never be going to that appointment. The person delivering the court papers was scheduled to arrive at exactly 6:30 p.m., 30 minutes after David usually got home from work. I carefully coordinated this timing with my lawyer, ensuring that both David and Margaret would be home, but immersed in their evening routines, unprepared for what was about to happen. I prepared dinner as usual, Margaret's favorite dish, vegetable stew. The irony of serving them one last home-cooked meal before presenting them with the legal documents that would destroy their comfortable life, built on lies, did not escape me. David came home at his usual time, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how his Mother's Day had been. I gave him the same information I had given him for 8 years. Margaret was tired. Her physical therapy was difficult. She was grateful for our care and support. It was all a lie. But at that moment, it was a lie that served my purpose. At 6:15 p.m., we sat down for dinner, the three of us around the dining room table, as we had done thousands of times before. Margaret praised the stew. David talked about his day at work. I smiled, nodded, and played my part perfectly one last time. At exactly 6:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. David looked at me with a puzzled expression and raised his eyebrows. Were we expecting someone? I calmly stood up, folded my napkin, and placed it next to my plate. "I'll get it," I said, and walked decisively toward the front door. The court process server was a professional woman in her 40s, dressed in business attire and carrying a leather briefcase. After verifying David's and my identities, she asked me to call her to the door. "David," I called out toward the dining room, my voice completely normal. "Can you come here for a minute? Someone wants to talk to you." I watched David's face as he approached the front door, saw the moment he realized this was not a neighbor or a delivery person. The court process server introduced herself and handed him the thick envelope containing the divorce papers, explaining his legal obligation to review the documents and respond within the specified time. David's surprise turned to panic as he opened the envelope and began to read. His face went pale as he read the first page summarizing the grounds for divorce: fraud, emotional abuse, conspiracy, and financial deception. His hands began to shake as he turned the pages and saw the timeline of evidence, financial calculations, and references to criminal fraud investigations. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What is this? What's going on?" But I didn't answer him. I was watching Margaret come in from the dining room, in her wheelchair, to see what was happening. She was perfectly maintaining her helpless persona, looking confused and anxious, playing her part, even though her world was collapsing around her. The court officer handed Margaret her own papers, the notice that she was under investigation for insurance fraud, medical fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial abuse. She took the documents with trembling hands, playing the role of weakness so convincingly that the process server seemed genuinely concerned about delivering legal papers to someone who appeared so vulnerable. "Ma'am, do you understand what these documents are?" the court clerk asked Margaret gently. Margaret looked up with bewildered and confused eyes. "I don't understand," she said in her practiced weak voice. "What could I have done? I can barely take care of myself." At that moment I spoke for the first time since the bailiff had arrived. "You can stop pretending now," I said calmly, looking directly at Margaret. "I have 8 months of video recording showing your morning exercise routine. I have recordings of your phone conversations laughing about your loyal little servant. I have documentation of every lie you told and every dollar you stole." The change in Margaret's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her confused defensiveness vanished, replaced by cold calculation, as she realized her deception had been exposed. She sat up straight in her wheelchair, and for the first time in 8 years, I saw her true self: sharp, manipulative, and utterly unremorseful. David was frantically reading the divorce papers, his panic growing as he saw the scope of the evidence I had gathered. "Sarah, we can work this out," he said desperately. "You don't fully understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "I understand that you and your mother have been running a fraud scheme for 8 years. I understand that you stole my career, my independence, and my life to fulfill your mother's desire for a personal servant. I understand that you encouraged me to sacrifice everything for a lie while hiding your." The bailiff completed his duties and left, but not before seeing that Margaret's attempt to maintain her disabled persona had completely failed. As soon as the front door closed, Margaret approached me in her wheelchair, her eyes blazing with anger. "Ungrateful little bitch," she shouted, her voice strong and clear. "After all we gave you, this is how you thank us? We gave you a purpose, a meaning. You were nothing before you started looking at me." David was still frantically reading the legal documents, but he looked up when his mother spoke. "Mom, don't," he said urgently. "Don't say another word." But Margaret didn't care about legal strategy. 8 years of pretending to be helpless had created a pent-up rage that was finally being released. "He should be grateful," Margaret continued. "We saved him from his pathetic little marketing career. We enabled him to do something important in his life." I stood there listening to this confession, knowing that everything was still being recorded by the security cameras operating throughout the house. Every word they were saying right now would be additional evidence for the criminal case already being prepared. "The cameras are still recording," I said quietly. "Everything you're saying right now is being recorded." David's face turned from white to gray when he understood the full implications. Not only were there 8 years of deception being exposed, but now they were confessing on camera, creating even more evidence for the legal proceedings to follow. Margaret had now completely abandoned her attempt to maintain her disabled persona. She rose from her wheelchair, her movements fluid and natural, and took a few steps toward me. "You think you're so clever," she said. "You think you've won something, but you've destroyed this family. You've destroyed everything we built together. You ruined it the moment you decided to build on lies," I replied. I calmly walked to the front closet and grabbed the suitcase I had packed that morning. I had been planning this moment for months and was ready to leave immediately after the documents were handed over. David finally looked up from the legal documents, the full weight of what was happening visible on his face. "Sarah, please," he said. "We can work this out. We can get counseling. We can fix this." But I had already started walking toward the door. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "Just justice needs to be served." I stopped at the front door and turned back to look at them one last time. Margaret stood beside her wheelchair, no longer trying to act disabled. David held the divorce papers as if they were a death sentence, which in many ways they were. "The house will be sold as part of the divorce settlement," I said. "You have 60 days to find another place to live. I suggest you use that time to find a good criminal defense attorney." Without turning back, I walked out the front door, leaving behind 8 years of lies, manipulation, and servitude. For the first time since Margaret's so-called accident, I was free to make my own choices, control my own destiny, and build a life based on truth instead of deception. Leaving calmly without engaging with their explanations or justifications was what my lawyer advised. Let them panic. Let them fret. Let them try to figure out how to defend the indefensible. I had work to do, and their crisis was no longer my responsibility. The next morning, I began systematically exposing Margaret and David's 8-year deception. I had spent weeks preparing for this stage, compiling a comprehensive package of evidence that was impossible to deny or explain away. The video evidence was first sent to Margaret's entire social circle. I had compiled a contact list from her phone, an address book, every friend she had been involved with before the so-called accident, every volunteer organization, every person who had sent her flowers or cards during her fake recovery period. The email I sent was simple and direct. "I thought you should know the truth about Margaret's condition. The attached video was filmed in my living room last week." I then added footage showing her entire exercise routine and an audio recording of a phone call where she referred to me as her loyal little servant. Responses started coming in within hours. Margaret's friends and former colleagues, realizing they had been manipulated just as much as I had, filled my inbox with messages filled with shock, disbelief, anger, and disgust. Many had donated money to help with her medical expenses, organized meal drives during her supposed recovery period, and sympathized with her tragic situation for years. In particular, an email from the director of the charity where Margaret had volunteered before the accident caught my attention. "I cannot express in words how betrayed we all feel. Margaret was scheduled to receive the Volunteer of the Year award next month for her courage." The social consequences for Margaret and David were swift and brutal. David's business relationships began to suffer as the news spread through his professional networks. His accounting firm worked with many people who knew Margaret, and her fake disability scandal reflected poorly on David's trustworthiness and character. I sent the evidence package to David's business partners, professional association, and key clients. The attached letter explained that David had been complicit in his mother's fraud, had hidden assets during the fraud, and was currently under investigation for numerous financial crimes. Within a week, David's biggest client terminated his contract. His business partner requested an urgent meeting to discuss recent developments affecting the firm's reputation. His professional license was placed under review by the State Board of Accountants. After contacting an investigative journalist specializing in fraud cases, the local news broke the story. The topic of reverse elderly fraud was very appealing to the media. The story of a supposedly disabled elderly woman exploiting her daughter-in-law's compassion for 8 years was the kind of story that captured the public's interest. The news segment aired on Thursday evening and featured footage of the exercise videos and interviews with Margaret's former friends, who felt betrayed by her deception. The reporter described how Margaret had garnered sympathy, assistance, and financial support from dozens of people who believed she was genuinely disabled and struggling with her condition. Margaret's reputation as a philanthropist was completely destroyed overnight. The woman, known for her charitable work and contributions to the community, was now notorious as a con artist who had exploited the kindness of everyone around her. This story spread beyond local news when it was picked up by national media outlets interested in unusual fraud cases. Margaret and David's names and photos appeared in articles titled, "8-Year Disability Scam," and "How a Fake Paralysis Scheme Fooled an Entire Community." They were immediately subjected to complete social isolation. Their friends stopped calling, their neighbors avoided them, and their former co-workers refused to acknowledge them in public. The social network they had built over decades vanished within days. I watched these events unfold with a surprising sense of satisfaction. I expected to feel guilty for destroying their reputation so completely, but instead I felt a sense of justice being served. They had isolated me from my friends and support system for 8 years. Now they were experiencing the same isolation they had imposed on me. The most satisfying part was knowing that their social ruin was entirely of their own making. I hadn't lied about them or exaggerated their crimes. I had simply exposed the truth they had worked so hard to hide, and the natural consequences of that truth were unfolding exactly as they deserved. Margaret's attempts to explain or justify her actions only made matters worse. In a disastrous interview with a local reporter, she claimed that by allowing me to look at her, she had given my life purpose and meaning. The public reaction to this statement was swift and harsh. Social media was flooded with messages condemning her arrogance and lack of remorse. David fared no better in his damage control efforts. His claim that he was protecting his mother's privacy while she was dealing with a complex medical situation was immediately contradicted by video evidence showing his mother in perfect physical health and her own recorded statements about the deception. The truth possessed a power their lies could never match. After 8 years of carefully constructing their deception, they were completely unprepared for the reality of public exposure and accountability. Former friends, colleagues, and community members felt personally betrayed by this elaborate fraud. These were not easily dismissible strangers. They were people who genuinely cared about Margaret, who anxiously followed her situation, and who did everything they could to help and support her during a difficult time in her life. The social consequences were permanent and irreversible. Once trust is broken on this scale, it cannot be rebuilt. Margaret and David would never again be welcome in the social and professional circles where they had once been respected members. They had built their comfortable lives on lies, and when that foundation collapsed, everything they had built upon it collapsed too. After the evidence was presented to the court, the divorce case progressed rapidly. My lawyer had prepared a comprehensive case documenting not only the fraud, but also the systematic financial abuse that had accompanied it for 8 years. The judge presiding over our case was a woman in her 60s who had seen many cases of infidelity in marriage, but even she seemed shocked by the scope and duration of the conspiracy David and Margaret had orchestrated. When we played the exercise video and then Margaret's phone call recording in court, the courtroom fell completely silent. David's lawyer attempted to argue that the security camera footage was inadmissible on the grounds of invasion of privacy and illegal recording. However, my lawyer was prepared for this defense. The cameras were installed in the common areas of our shared home, and the recordings captured evidence of ongoing fraud. This demonstrated that the surveillance was legally justified. Using the evidence to secure a settlement in our favor became the main strategy of the case. My lawyer presented detailed financial calculations showing not only my immediate loss of income, but also the value of my career over the 8 years I spent as Margaret's unpaid caregiver. The figures presented in the court documents were staggering. In fact, if I had continued to advance my marketing career, instead of leaving my job to care for a woman who was not disabled, my lifetime earnings would have been significantly higher. The combined effect of missed promotions, lost networking opportunities, and gaps in my professional experience amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential loss. However, the settlement wasn't just about lost wages. The court acknowledged the damages caused by 8 years of systematic deception and manipulation. The judge stated that this was not a case of marital problems or incompatibility, but rather documented fraud committed against me by my own husband and mother-in-law. The court's acceptance of years of fake caregiving was particularly satisfying. The judge clearly stated that David's mother's participation in the deception was a fundamental breach of the marriage contract. She had not only failed to protect me from fraud, but had actively participated in defrauding me. Taking the marital home and most of the assets felt like justice had finally been served. The house where I had worked as an unpaid servant for 8 years would now be entirely mine. The retirement accounts David had accumulated while I sacrificed my career would be divided in my favor to compensate for my lost earning potential. David's hidden accounts surfaced during the disclosure of financial information and became further evidence of his deceptive practices. The money he had secretly accumulated while encouraging my financial dependence would now be divided as marital assets. David's attempts to contest the agreement were pitiful and futile. His lawyer argued that Margaret's deception had victimized David too, that he, like me, had been manipulated by his mother. However, recorded evidence of his active participation in perpetuating the lie made this defense untenable. My phone records showed that David repeatedly reinforced Margaret's supposed restrictions, refused to answer my questions about her condition, and encouraged me to continue giving up career opportunities to look after her. These were not the actions of someone who had been deceived. They were the actions of someone actively participating in the deception. When David took the witness stand for his own defense, his story collapsed under cross-examination. My lawyer systematically reminded him of specific incidents where he lied to me about his mother's condition, dismissed my concerns, and encouraged me to make further sacrifices of my independence to meet Margaret's alleged needs. The moment he admitted he knew about the deception was devastating for his case. Under oath, pressed with detailed questions about specific conversations and events, David finally confessed that he knew his mother was not actually paralyzed. "When did you realize your mother was not disabled?" my lawyer asked. David's answer destroyed any remaining credibility he might have had. "I never thought she was really paralyzed. It was all her idea. But I went along with it because it was an important job that would make Sarah happy." The courtroom fell silent as it absorbed the impact of his audacious statement. He claimed that 8 years of fraud and manipulation had been for my benefit, that stealing my career and independence was somehow a kindness. The judge's response was swift and harsh. The judge stated that David's statement showed not only his complicity in the fraud, but also his complete lack of understanding of the damage it caused. His claim that the deception benefited me, even under oath, showed either astonishing ignorance or deliberate manipulation. The finalization of the divorce felt like the end of an 8-year nightmare. When the judge signed the final papers, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even been aware of. For the first time since Margaret's so-called accident, I was legally free from the obligation to care for her or meet her supposed needs. The financial settlement was more comprehensive than I had hoped. In addition to getting the house and most of our joint assets, the court ordered David to pay ongoing alimony to compensate for the interruption to my career. The judge noted that, given my age and the gap in my professional experience, rebuilding my earning potential would be difficult and costly. But perhaps most importantly, the divorce decree included specific findings regarding fraud committed against me. These findings would be crucial for the ongoing criminal case and would ensure that David and Margaret faced consequences beyond just the end of my marriage. The court had officially acknowledged that I was the victim of a systematic conspiracy designed to exploit my labor and affection for 8 years. This legal acknowledgement validated everything I had endured and sacrificed during those years. Leaving the courthouse with my final divorce decree felt like walking out of prison. I was free, financially secure, and possessed legal documents proving that everything I had experienced was not the result of unfortunate circumstances, but of deliberate fraud. Putting the house up for sale felt like the final step in erasing 8 years of lies and manipulation from my life. It wasn't just a real estate transaction, it was a symbolic cleansing of everything that house represented. The house that had harbored 8 years of lies was about to become someone else's new beginning, and I felt a deep satisfaction from this transformation. Each room held memories of my servitude, Margaret's careful performances, David's careless dismissal of my concerns. Selling the house would allow me to fully close that chapter of my life. The first step was to erase all traces of David and Margaret from the property. Margaret's personal belongings were packed into boxes and left on the front porch so she could come and collect them. After 8 years of providing free service, I didn't feel any obligation to make this process easier for her. Her clothes, books, photographs, exercise equipment stored in storage boxes, it all became her problem. David's belongings were treated the same way. His clothes, office supplies, golf clubs, collection of business books, everything was efficiently packed and left to be picked up. Since I didn't want anything in my new life to remind me of their deception, I kept nothing that belonged to either of them. Getting rid of all their belongings was a more therapeutic symbolic cleansing than I expected. Every box I packed, every item I discarded, every trace I erased from the house felt like reclaiming the space they had stolen from me. I'm sure you would feel the same way if you were in my shoes. The concept that had been forming in my mind for months was finally ready to become reality. I would use this money to create something beautiful and meaningful that would help other caregivers, while providing perfect ironic justice for what Margaret and David had done to me. The perfect irony of using their lies to help their victims did not escape me. Margaret and David had stolen 8 years of my life through deception and manipulation. Now, the proceeds from this theft would finance a place where people who truly dedicated their lives to caring for others could find the support and healing they deserved. 3 weeks after the opening, I knew they were watching me because Margaret called me. When I saw her name on the caller ID, I almost didn't answer the phone, but my curiosity got the better of me. "You think you're so clever," she said bluntly, her voice carrying the same cold anger I remembered from the night the divorce papers were served. "You're turning our private family matter to some kind of public battle. It stopped being private the moment you tried to steal 8 years of my life," I replied calmly. "You're profiting off our situation," he accused. "You're making money off your sob story about how badly you were treated." The accusation was so absurd it was almost comical. Sanctuary operated on a non-profit model, and any surplus revenue was reinvested into expanding programs and providing scholarships for caregivers who couldn't afford our services. As the executive director, I earned a modest salary. My understanding that the best revenge is building a better life has been the foundation of everything I've achieved since leaving that house full of lies. I could have spent these 8 years in pain, focused on punishing them, determined to ruin their lives as they ruined mine. Instead, I chose to channel my energy into something constructive, something that would help others and give meaning to the senseless pain I endured. The sanctuary is proof that even the worst betrayals can be transformed into a source of strength and purpose. The ultimate peace that comes from turning pain into purpose is something I feel every day when I see the impact our work has on people who truly need and deserve support. Every caregiver who finds peace at the sanctuary, every person who learns to recognize manipulation and exploitation, every family who avoids the kind of abuse I experienced, they all represent a victory over the forces that tried to ruin my life. Margaret and David thought they could use my compassion against me, weaponize my desire to help others, and turn my sense of duty into a tool for their own gain. They succeeded for 8 years, but their success was temporary. My compassion, directed toward those who deserved it, became the foundation for something beautiful and lasting. The irony is perfect and lasting. They used my nurturing nature to exploit me, and I used their exploitation to become a better caregiver for people who truly needed help. They tried to diminish me, but instead, they became a catalyst for me to discover strengths I never knew I had. 8 years later, I am healthier, happier, and more fulfilled than I was when I was married to David. I have meaningful work, genuine friendships, and a sense of purpose that no one can take away from me. I turned their betrayal into my triumph, their lies into my truth, and their destruction into my creativity. As far as I've learned, the best revenge isn't forcing your enemies to suffer. It's building such a meaningful, successful, and truly satisfying life that their attempts to destroy you become insignificant footnotes in a story of resilience and healing. If you're watching this video and recognize yourself in my story, If you're living someone else's lie or sacrificing your life to serve someone who doesn't deserve your devotion, I want you to know that your situation is not hopeless and that your strength is greater than their deception. Take care of yourself. See you soon.